You know, not all faces are happy faces, but faces are faces, and there's a profound statement, and it's really one of the primary ways that we know each other, by our faces. And of course, it's also the way government and big corporations would like to know us better, is by our faces, by facial recognition. We're going to explore not all of them, we're going to explore many of the varieties of the face in our lives today. That sounds kind of inarticulate, but I know I'll do a much better job when the show starts. We'll talk to an artist, and we'll talk to journalists who've been covering the face.
Happy face. Put on a happy face. Look at that face, just look at it. Look at that fabulous face of yours. I knew first look I took at it. This was the face that the world adores. Look at those eyes, as wise and as deep as the sea. Look at that nose, it shows what a nose should be.
Sammy, I want to play the whole song, but we've got work to do here. We're talking about the face today. We're going to talk about facial recognition technology in the second segment. We're going to talk to an artist who creates faces in very unusual ways in the final segment. But for an overview of the face, well, we're going to begin with Cal Revely-Calder, writer and editor who is literary editor of The Telegraph and who wrote for The New Yorker this year, What Happened to Your Face? How the Human Countenance Became Something to Study, Edit, Optimize, and Scan. First of all, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thanks for having me.
So, working off the subtitle of this the speech, which uses of the piece, which uses the word became, the implication is, and it's there in your article, that for a long time, knowing about one's face was not an automatic thing that you could do, and having an idea of what lots and lots and lots of other people who you were not personally acquainted with, what their faces were like, was also not something that was readily available. We tend to forget that, but maybe talk about if we're living in the Roman Empire or the time of Alexander the Great, who I'll get to in just a second. How would we be thinking about faces that's different from the way we think about them now?
Well, exactly as you say, we saw less of them. And this is the thing. We've always had, for instance, mirrors, right? I mean, there's always been reflective parts of the world. Narcissus looked at himself in a glade in the forest. People would look at polished metal. I mean, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Aztecs, they all independently developed mirrors, polishing obsidian and that kind of thing. But until really you get to about the 16th century, we don't have mirrors the way that you and I have mirrors now. Everyone listening has mirrors in their home, in their car. The phone obviously changes things because you can just look at yourself through a camera all the time. So what you would have had is a kind of lifestyle in which obviously you knew what other people's faces looked like. You saw them all day, every day. And in some ways that would have been critical to life. If you live in, let's say, like a medieval village, knowing who's from where you are and who isn't is like crucial to preserving the integrity of the community. And if a crime is committed, you raise a hue and cry. You have to go and find someone. You have a very rudimentary description. So you kind of have to know about faces. But it's that the way in which they're presented to you so consistently and the options that you're given, even I would say the compulsion we're now given to improve them, to compare them, to judge them, that's the thing that's really changed. I think they're more of a system. They're more like a currency now than they ever used to be.
Doing some reading for this show, I stumbled across the interesting reference to the fact that Alexander the Great had kind of an authorized version of his face. There was one sculptor named Lysippos whom he trusted, and he gave that guy the job of making the only authorized bust of him. And who knows whether it really looked like Alexander the Great. But he early on saw, I think, the value of controlling the idea of what one's face looks like, which is something that we're still kind of interested in even today.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's really interesting that I mean, for the majority of human history, art and sculpture and kind of public representations, they haven't been realistic. I mean, like 95% of our history going right back to sort of the caves in France 30,000 years ago. But there's a small window around the era of kind of late ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, and then it kind of closes again with the medieval era, comes back in the Renaissance, and then onwards. But there's a small classical window, speaking in terms of like the whole of history, where realism kind of comes in and it becomes a thing. That's probably partly to do with the idea that yeah, you can use a realistic image to kind of represent you if you're someone in power, but then also, as you're saying, subtly to control it. You have to have this baseline idea that a statue represents a person before you can then manipulate that into the version of the person you want to show. And that's what happens a lot with the Romans, right? Like we know that the statues of the Caesars, like we can tell when it's a statue of a Caesar that we've just dug up because you can recognize certain features there, like the aquiline nose or whatever, which was like a sort of a type. But also, we are well aware that those things were being kind of gussied up for the purposes of public propaganda. It's a mix.
Yes. I mean, all of reality was being gussied up for the benefit of the emperor, including what his face might look like. So I think just while we're on the subject of emperors, here in the U.S., we have a president right now who likes to put his face on things. He likes to put his face on the side of buildings and on passports that are not his passport and possibly on currency. And it made me realize, as you think back, particularly in literature, that idea of big face on things equaling a kind of unchecked power. I mean, in 1984, we have on each landing opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you. The caption beneath it ran. Right there, we're sort of seeing that's not an innocuous or benign move to start putting your face on a lot of things.
No, absolutely. It's stamping your authority, and it's kind of that kind of goes back to like the medieval theory of the king's two bodies, where like one is the actual body, and one is that the king incarnates the country, like incarnates the body politic in some way. And yeah, I mean, as soon as you have like when portrait painting comes about, which is sort of basically the 15th century, it starts with the elite. And it's kind of used by people to demonstrate their status. Like you have to have a lot of money to be able to commission someone to paint you. But also by having your image up in places, it follows on from an era, the medieval era, where very roughly speaking, portraits were of Christ or portraits were of the Holy Family or religious figures. They were icons, like they were symbols of power. And in a sense, as you're saying, like everything kind of comes out of that. Like pictures of powerful faces are still meant to be charged with a certain authority. And exactly as you suggest, I mean, I have a king, right? I mean, he's on my passport and he has a certain kind of sovereign power of the country. You have a president who quite likes this idea and is sticking his face on things to kind of try to aspire to that more than just human power. The face is exactly the way to do that.
Right. I mean, we also have a president who the other distinctive image we have of him is a mugshot that was taken of him during a criminal booking, which is obviously unprecedented in American history for a president, which he immediately leaned into. And he started selling mugs with his mugshot on it. He started, it actually is a somewhat flattering mugshot as these things go. But here is somebody who won't turn down any opportunity to kind of assault us with his face, even when he's in an act with most of us would regard as shame.
Yeah, and his second official portrait as well is very different to the first one. It's a lot more dark, a lot more vengeful. I mean, it's a very melodramatic.
I think it's based on the mugshot. I think they use the mugshot as kind of a jumping off point. And it also made me think. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I also wound up thinking. Well, first of all, in Gatsby, we have that billboard with the eyes of Dr. Eckelberg, which are once again they're sort of all-seeing eyes of God, Big Brother eyes. But I went back and looked at that original painting that was done for the cover. It was done by the Spanish artist Francis Cugat. And it blew Fitzgerald's mind so much that he went back and rewrote portions of the novel to sort of that face. It's really just this blue field with these very kind of brooding eyes and a set of lips that are pretty clearly Daisy Buchanan's. except that it's also very Dr. Eckelberg too. I mean, it's interesting that the face was so vivid to Fitzgerald. He felt he had to rewrite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the eyes are exactly what have it in that case, right? I mean, eyes are this sort of fascinating mixture of they're symbols of seduction and allure. They're meant to be the windows to the soul, but at the same time, they're kind of, that they monitor us, they watch us, they give you this idea that you're being surveilled. I mean, I don't know how it was over there, but in Britain during the COVID pandemic, there was a ton of kind of government sort of iconography, like posters in places that used eyes in a very large way, like sometimes just eyes, or you'd have like a little man he was wearing his mask or something, but the eyes were very clear. And a lot of it relied on, there's a phenomenon in psychology called the watching eyes effect, which shows that if you're in a place where the authorities think something bad's going to happen, you're going to burgle a place, you're going to smash something up, putting a poster that just has a pair of eyes on reduces the likelihood of that happening like by a really significant amount. And it's obviously people don't literally think those eyes are watching them. Like we're not stupid. And to some extent, you can just say, well, the logical connection is that they must think there's a camera nearby. It's kind of iconographic. But it does seem as though on some primal level too, the eyes they get to us, whether it's, with Gatsby, the kind of allure of Daisy, or whether it's, sort of, a local council warning you not to put your bin bag in the wrong place.
You towards the end of your piece, the piece is wonderful, by the way, and just encompasses so many different things. You end with some stuff about the photographer Peter Hujar, who's recently been commemorated in that film. So I went back and I looked at some of Hujar's portraits again, photographic portraits. I mean, it's really interesting because we have painting portraiture in which obviously interpretation is necessary. There's just you have to. But with photographic portraits, interpretation is there too. One of the things that's interesting about Hujar, if you look at his portraits of like William S. Burroughs or Susan Sontag or John Waters, it's not just the face. He likes torsos. He likes people lying down. He likes people lying. Burroughs is kind of lying propped. His head is propped on his arm. And it somehow or other makes the face pop more that the torso is there. I don't know if you have a theory about why he was doing that, but when we think of photographic portraiture, we think of the face. He was interested in angles or something.
Yeah, he was. I don't really have a theory, but I think that the photos, they pick on something that's kind of generally true about our brains, which is that they recognize faces more quickly than they pretty much recognize any other object. I mean, there is a part of our brain specifically dedicated to processing faces, and that part of the brain, it kind of picks them up like a unity. It kind of gets the whole thing at once. It seems to be hardwired into us. Like babies recognize faces pretty much before they recognize anything else. So I think Hujar kind of knew something or intuited something about the fact that our eyes are drawn to a face whenever we see a portrait, but like the face and the body tend to be inseparable for like obvious reasons. And so there's a kind of tension between whether one is displaying one thing and one is doing the other. Is the body backing up the face? Is the face backing up the body? Like what's going on there? And I think the thing I was trying to say about the Edwin Denby photograph at the end of my New Yorker piece was that that Hujar's work really conjures a whole bunch of possibilities without ever really resolving them. You kind of have to figure out what you think for yourself. And then you realize that tension, that multiplicity in what you're looking at, it's kind of true of any face you look at, any body you look at. It's like the beautiful thing about faces and bodies.
So let's, we were talking about literature a little bit before. Let's go way back in literature. If we go back to Chaucer, he uses references to people's faces in a way that's very reflective of the vogue for physiognomy at the time. This idea that your face said something about your character. So Chaucer says someone was gap-toothed or had a red beard or a nose with a wart on it, or he's actually saying something to his readers that they probably will interpret a little bit more than just the simple literal words of it. This is a time when the idea of faces linking to character has started to be in vogue. So it's like a shortcut for Chaucer. He doesn't have to explain things. He just says, this is what the face looked like. Draw your own conclusions. But talk a little bit more about how you see that from your article, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most ancient kind of, I don't want to say art, because I mean, I think we would contest that it's an art, but physiognomy goes right back again to the ancient Greeks. As long as people have been trying to figure out how to interpret faces, they've been trying to think about that interpretation as schematic. So, people thought of Socrates or described Socrates as ugly, and whatever we want to say about that as an aesthetic judgment, it was linked to his moral character. And that's kind of been the physiognomic thing all the way down. It really, it sort of vanishes for a while, I guess, maybe because like the Christian moral system has its own ways of thinking about like the soul and virtue and that sort of thing. But it comes back towards the end of the medieval era, exactly. And then it really booms in the Renaissance and in the early Enlightenment when people are trying to match up facial characteristics to sort of qualities of personality. And the idea is that you cannot hide. Like if you can change the way that you walk maybe, or you can change the way that you talk, but you cannot change the way that your face looks. And if you have a system that's sufficiently adept at reading faces, then, well, you can kind of find the wrongdoers. And as soon as photography then comes along and provides a way of sort of putting out faces into some sort of system of comparison, laying them all out on the table, the idea then comes about that you can, come up with typologies of people, like everyone who has, long noses does a certain thing, everyone who has sort of thick necks does a certain thing. And this obviously becomes bound up with all kinds of things, all kinds of sort of racial, quote unquote theories, all kinds of prejudices. And it takes quite a while for it to sort of be banished from polite society. I mean, it always had critics, but it takes a while. And I think it's still basically there. It's the implicit thing that underlies a lot of facial recognition thinking, the idea that, your face is the representative of you. And even if we don't think anymore that a certain kind of mouth equals a certain kind of flaw in your personality, we still treat the face as something that's, you can't change it. It's there. It's the thing that represents you. It is identical with you. And you're stuck with it.
As you're speaking, Cal, I'm also thinking about how Tolkien kind of inverts that. When the hobbits first meet Aragorn, he looks kind of suspicious and shady. And Frodo eventually says something like, it seems to me that a servant of the enemy would look more fair, but feel more foul. And Aragorn, or Strider, mentions, whereas I look foul and feel more fair. And Tolkien's kind of saying, don't judge a book by its cover. We have to talk really quick. We're running out of time here. This is all fascinating stuff. We do want to talk a little bit about this idea of looks maxing, which includes apparently breaking bones in yourself to make yourself look better. But this guy Clavicular, whom you quote there, this kind of jumped out at me from your article. At one point, he has said that beauty isn't about sexual attraction; it's about mathematics, which is, I think, contra to so much of what we've just talked about so far. That the subjectivism somehow or other enters into it. But first of all, maybe explain for the listeners who we're talking about, what we're talking about.
Well, so Clavicular is an American influencer. He is sort of known for his distinctive looks. I think when you say this to people, they think he's going to look totally like freaky, but he kind of doesn't. He just has a sort of like a very sharp jaw. He has this practice of breaking small bones in his jaw and then trying to reset them, so he makes his jaw as like kind of angular and smooth as possible. The idea that it's about mathematics, I mean, in a weird way, he's right, or there's something right about it, which is that he's right in the sense that the way in which, if you're looks maxing, i.e. if you're trying to like improve or optimize your face for social media or for kind of circulation or consumption, what you're doing is you're participating in a system, an internet system, which rewards likes and engagement and basically data. You're turning your face into data, or you're surfing on a wave of data. And so what he's kind of doing is he's exploiting the idea, which is sort of true on some level, that faces have become something that can be kind of improved algorithmically. You can win the battle to make your face the best. And this is why something like quote unquote Instagram face has developed this tendency in the last decade for young women to have sort of high cheekbones and sort of very smoothed out palettes and long lashes. It's kind of Kardashian sort of look. Again, that's something that has developed through Instagram. It's become prioritized by the algorithm, and so people flock to it and they want to ride that wave and succeed in it. It's all part of a sort of grand system of incentives.
It's so odd, though, when you think about how we have thought about beauty over the years. I'm older than you, so I remember in the 1970s, where kind of the dominant fashion model for quite a while was Lauren Hutton, who by her own description had a lopsided face, crossed eyes, bumpy nose, and a huckleberry fin gap between my front teeth. She wasn't classically beautiful, but often we are drawn to the face that in fact, shrugs off perfection in favor of idiosyncrasy. And it's as though with this whole thing with looks maxing and making it mathematical, we're kind of abandoning the serendipity that leads us to beauty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. I mean, in the real world, no one would really want to abide by these rules or lay claim to abiding by them. And yet, the problem is that we're trapped within a kind of process or a sort of series of systems which have just very different incentives. They have different designs on our faces. And once people get kind of bound into that, thinking that they're entering them freely and just kind of having fun or playing around or whatever, they don't realize that the system has its own priorities, and that's not what the heart wants. It might be what like the data wants, but not what the heart wants.
That is beautifully expressed. We have to end there. Cal Revely-Calder, thank you so much for the article. What Happened to Your Face in the New Yorker, June 29th, 2026. Writer and editor, literary editor for the Telegraph. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about facial recognition. It's not going to be nice.
I've just seen her face, I can't forget the time or place where we just met. She's just the girl for me, and I want all the world to see we've met.
So we're going to continue talking about faces, but now how they can be used to identify us. You read these stories all the time now about a grandmother from Tennessee who winds up spending 4 months in jail in Tennessee before being kind of deported to North Dakota, accused of bank fraud in a state she's never even visited, held without bail, all because facial recognition software seemed to think that she was the person in North Dakota doing those bad things. How did we get here? Well, the person who's done a wonderful job of documenting that for us is Kashmir Hill, a journalist for the New York Times, and author of Your Face Belongs to Us. Her article, Your Face Is Not Your Own, appeared back in March of 2021. First of all, welcome to our conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So you focused on a company called Clearview AI, although I think at one point in the article you say if they hadn't gotten there, somebody was going to get there. Russia and China were already getting there. We were going to have facial recognition in our lives. But this seems to be, in America, in the U.S., the company that sort of said, yes, we can make the face into a fingerprint. But say a little bit more about how that was the case.
Yeah, so Clearview AI was the first one to do something that other companies were not willing to do. And that was that they went and scraped billions of photos from the internet, from social media sites, and built this tool where you could take a photo of somebody or upload a photo of somebody, and it would match it to all these other photos that existed of them on the internet, which was a really handy tool for law enforcement when they were trying to identify people. So Clearview started selling this tool kind of secretly to police departments back in, it feels like a million years ago now, but back in 2019, 2020, and that is when I first wrote about them.
Yes, and what they were doing, or what they were ultimately doing, it was sort of beyond just saying, oh, here's a lot of faces, this face looks like that face. They were using, to put it crudely, math, really, to create a system that would do that, arguably flawlessly, although obviously, as I just suggested, otherwise, right? This was a pretty high-level attempt to create the ability to look at a brand new picture of a face and know whose face it was.
Yeah, exactly. It's creating a kind of face print that makes you identifiable, given that you have photos online to kind of match your face to. And police officers that I talked to who used this tool said it was really extraordinary. They had had facial recognition before. There's been facial recognition for decades now. Before it was kind of based on mugshots. But this new tool really was helping them to solve crimes where the only lead they really had was a photo of somebody.
It was in your piece. It's very interesting too that you kind of alluded to it without mentioning the names of the companies, but that originally, way back in the day, Google and Facebook regarded all this as kind of a bridge too far. They weren't sure that they wanted that kind of thing. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Google, as early as 2011, there was an engineer there who said they were working on a tool like this to identify people by face. And Google ended up not releasing that tool. And Eric Schmidt, then CEO of Google, back in 2011, said it was the one technology that Google had developed and decided not to release because they just thought it would be too dangerous in the hand of kind of an evil dictator. Facebook too was, Facebook, I think most of us know who've been around for a while. Facebook used to have something called auto tagging of photos. So you could upload a photo of somebody and it would suggest the names of people that were in the photo. So you could easily tag them and they'd get a notification. So, they were working on facial recognition internally, and they were even working on a kind of way of identifying strangers. I watched this one video that was made by engineers inside the company back in 2017 where they had a smartphone on the brim of a hat and they were looking at different people in the room and it would shout out their name. But they too, Meta, in Google, these companies are not known for being super privacy protective, but even they thought this is a little too toxic. This is a little too dangerous to release. We're not comfortable doing that.
Ann Landers used to say that nobody can take advantage of you without your cooperation. And I think this stuff kind of scares us at a 1984 level, but intrigues us in other ways. Like I don't have like clinical face blindness, but I'm really bad at recognizing people out of context. I could run into a person I work with in a big, huge party and I have trouble figuring out who they are. So the idea of Google Glasses or something like that would just, pony up that name for me right away is very, very tempting. It's just the question is what comes along with that, right?
And this is what the executives of Meta talk about is, Meta is now considering putting this feature in their smart glasses. They have developed it internally. It's called Name Tag, and it would do exactly what you're saying. You would go to a cocktail party, you'd see that person who's in your Facebook network, and it would supply the name to you. And I know that the company wants to release this feature. I know Mark Zuckerberg's really excited about it. He thinks that this would help differentiate their smart glasses from other offerings on the market. And they're basically trying to figure out, can we release this in a way where we won't face lots of backlash, where we won't get in trouble with regulators, we won't break laws that are out there that protect against kind of use of people's biometric information. But yeah, they do want to give it to us. And it's a question of, do we actually want that? Like, is it worth it, like you were saying, to have this at a party if it also means that maybe you get identified when you're at a protest or when you're buying, I don't know, hemorrhoid cream at the pharmacy? There's so many times in life where we want to be anonymous, and this technology could strip that away.
Yeah, no, the ship has sailed for me in terms of the hemorrhoid cream. But and I think I will miss, if this happens, I'll miss the moment where someone says to me, "You have no idea who I am, do you?" But so there are like little folk ways that will vanish with that. But to your point, there is, and it's there in your article, that kind of sense of whose ox is being gored, having an effect on how we feel about this. So you've got the facial recognition software being used by law enforcement and other government agencies during the post-George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. And so I'm sitting there thinking, bad. But then you end your article with facial recognition software being used to identify the people who attacked the Capitol in 2021. And I'm thinking, good. But it doesn't really work that right way, right? It isn't just going to be used in the way that we are comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, it is being used right now. There's lots of police departments around the country who have facial recognition tools. I mean, where we've been talking about it most recently, where it's been upsetting people, is that ICE has been using facial recognition for identifying people. In some cases, protesters say that this technology has been used against them. We recently have this kind of stunning DHS investigation of protesters in Minnesota. And one of them just in their court filing said that Clearview AI was used to identify them. This is where DHS was, going to church meetings, kind of public gatherings of people who are protesting and identifying them. And so that is the fear around this technology. Yes, I think most of us would like this to be used when a crime is committed. But once you do give authorities the ability to identify anybody, it can be used in ways that we find chilling, like to suppress civil dissent, to impinge on our First Amendment rights, or to prosecute crimes that we're not as comfortable with, like immigration. And so that's where it's gotten tricky for police.
Even as you and I speak, we're having this happen here in Connecticut this week. We've got ICE in Connecticut. One of our reporters described an ICE agent putting the phone up to the person he was taking and seeing something on the device, and then taking that individual and putting them in handcuffs in vehicles. And it kind of gets to that point, too. And there's we should say there's a lot of interesting legal discussions that go on in your piece. One of the kind of crusaders for all of the things that I believe in, Freud Abrams, winds up on the other side of this whole question, which was a little bit disturbing to me. But that whole idea, like, let's say there's a traffic stop, cop pulls you over for whatever. The idea that they are going to be able to point a device at you and pull up not just, your identity, which presumably you're already providing them with your license, but a whole bunch of other information. And that kind of raises the question, what is this information? Is it like popping my trunk and searching my belongings? It isn't exactly that, but there are obviously search and seizure rules that govern what they can do and when they can do that way. I'm not sure we have the laws right now to sort of say, okay, that's not okay. You're pulling up information that you're not necessarily entitled to.
Yeah, there aren't really hard and fast laws right now. In past years when I've been working on this, a lot of the police said, hey, we're not using this to identify people in real time. We're not running this on surveillance cameras or making hot list of faces of people that we're looking for. We use this retroactively to solve crimes where, something criminal has happened, it was on surveillance video, and we're running someone's face. But that feels like it's changing right now. But I think the question is even bigger than how do police use it. There's this question of how do we want corporations using this? How do we want this used by us on other people? One of the crazier uses of facial recognition that I saw by a corporation was Madison Square Garden, the events venue where the Knicks play. And Madison Square Garden started using facial recognition for security reasons to kind of keep out people if they'd been violent or gotten into a fight at the facility. And James Dolan, who operates MSG, decided, actually, I want to use this to punish my political enemies. I'm going to use this to keep out lawyers who work at firms that have sued us. And so all of a sudden, these lawyers who are trying to go to Fish concerts or a Rangers game or to see the Knicks would get turned away at the door because they had been identified by face. And that was this kind of stunning use by a corporation. And there was this question of, are they allowed to do this?
No. Well, so the person you've been dealing with from our staff, Lily Tyson, my senior producer, I guarantee you she's thinking right now about just wearing like an elephant mask in public for the rest of her life after reading your article. But I'm just wondering, how about you? You know a lot about this now. Is there anything that you've tried to do to keep yourself out of this meat grinder of facial recognition?
I mean, I think the ship has sailed for me. I have a lot of photos of me online, so I don't think I'm going to be eradicating them or making my face private. But I do think about it with my children, and I don't tend to post public photos of them, in part because I just want to protect their privacy and let them determine what their own digital footprint is, but also thinking about if they are in this world where you can search their face and it assembles everything. The only thing you can do is make your accounts private, make them so Clearview can't scrape them. If you have a public Instagram account, then you're in Clearview's database. If your account is private, they can't scrape those photos, only your kind of public profile photo. So thinking about what's public and what's private is one of those things that I think a lot about more now, knowing facial recognition is out there.
Kashmir Hill, thank you so much. Journalist at the New York Times, author of Your Face Belongs to Us, author of the article Your Face is Not Your Own in the New York Times back in 2021, when the world was young and more innocent. We're going to take a little break, and then we're going to talk to an artist of portraiture, but a very unusual approach to portraiture.
Faces, smiling faces tell lies, and I've got proof.
First, I have to say a few thank yous. One of them is to Dylan Reyes, our technical producer, the maestro. And also, Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions has brought this particular project to you. So we thank them or her or whoever's behind that mysterious entity. So this next segment is so intriguing to me, and it's also very, very challenging because it's just very difficult to talk about art on the radio. It just doesn't really work. On the other hand, the work of Jessica Helfand is so amazing that I'm thrilled to be talking to her about it. Jessica Helfand is an artist and writer. She's the author of Face, a Visual Odyssey. Welcome to our conversation.
I'm so delighted to be part of this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
So, a lot of what you do, I mean, the face. First of all, I just want to say, when we're all done here, when you're all done listening to us, go to Jessica's website and actually look at what we're talking about. It's jessicahelfand.com, and a lot of the faces that you render are either from fiction or maybe kind of undertold stories of people from the servant class and in wealthy 19th century homes. Let's start with these fictional faces. So you will show us what Lily Bart might have looked like from House of Mirth, or Marianne Dashwood from Sense and Sensibility, and these images, they're just very arresting. Can you describe your process getting to a picture that doesn't really exist from words that do exist by a writer?
How much time do we have? No, it's a great question. So I think what needs to be said, and of course it's anathema to many visual people to admit that I use AI, but I do use AI. And in the case of the way that I work in the studio, I think the missing link that people often don't think about with AI is the degree to which language gets us where we need to go. So I think less about optimizing an image than humanizing an image. And in the case of the character studies, which you're talking about, these fictional portraits, I combined a sketch of the character based on my reading of a story with the actual language that the person, the author who invented that character, came up with to describe the face. So the prompt is informed by language that is not only my language. And that strikes me as a much more authentic way to try to get to a final image.
But you are using words to create a picture of someone who has never actually existed.
Right.
And first of all, I have to say I'm very proud of myself. Jessica, we went to the same university, and I had my 50th reunion this year, and we had a tour of the British Art Gallery, and the tour guide used the word trony, which I'd never heard that word before, so I learned a new word at age 71. But trony is essentially a portrait of somebody who doesn't really exist. The stuff that you're doing is that, but it's like on steroids or something. And I want to know a little bit more about how you take words and then get to that image, get to Lily Bart, get to so many of the heroines that you write about are often, Emma Bovary, or people who are kind of trapped.
Right. And in the case of the other body of work that you mentioned a minute ago, Colin, it was called the Service Society. And these were portraits of Irish immigrants painted in the style of John Singer Sargent because these people's employers were painted by John Singer Sargent. And it was a sort of way to right the balance in terms of the upstairs, downstairs. And in that case, I worked from diaries and letters and excerpts of language that these people had sent home to Ireland. So I think, look, here's the thing about faces. It's a common currency we all share. Everybody thinks they know them. Everybody does know them. You look in the mirror, you see yourself, you see other people. We project onto other people. It's something with which we are, all of us, extremely fluent. And yet a painting, to me, in the age of where photography and Instagram dominate the cultural conversation, the visual conversation in so many ways, I think a painting stops you in your tracks. So I mention this because I work with and from photographs. I paint on top of photographs. I work with the kind of composite identities of multiple sketches that begin as photographs, and then I paint on top of them and let go of the photograph. Where language enters into this is really a technological conceit. And I will say that I was many years ago, during the pandemic, maybe not so many years ago, I was the artist in residence at Caltech. Nerdiest artist residency you can get. It was fantastic. And it was the first place I had heard the term prompt engineer, which I, without guile, truly authentically thought was a great job for a poet. And all these scientists said, no, it actually has to do with large language models. And I thought, no, it has to do with language. And artists of all stripes, and I think of myself as a writer and a painter. So I'm kind of, I go back and forth with those two methods of observation and expression. So to me, the idea that a prompt can allow me to take language that Theodore Dreiser used, or Flaubert used, or you used, and enter it into a prompt allows me, I think, to get nearer to a likeness, a countenance that somehow bears the authenticity of its original author.
So I did something of a deep dive today, and I discovered something about your past, and I'm wondering whether you consider it relevant to some of these projects. And that is, at one point, you were a writer on soap operas.
It is so relevant. Oh my God.
Tell me.
So it's relevant because so you mentioned we both went to Yale. When I was an undergraduate at Yale, I split my time between the studio and the rehearsal hall, and I was an actor. And of course, to be an actor at Yale sounds like I was Meryl Streep. I was not Meryl Streep, but I did have many opportunities to perform. And when I finished school, I hated auditioning and I wasn't as talented as my compatriots. But what I miss and what I loved was getting to be somebody else. And I think that has a lot to do with the way I paint. I paint like a method actor. I do a lot of research. I go deep into character. I go deep into voice and simulation and all the kinds of things that I think serious actors do when they are crafting a character. I just do it visually. So what soap opera writing, which it's true, I did do that, and it was a great experience in not getting too precious about your work because you had to write 100 pages a day or something. But it also let me understand the relationship between the human voice and the dramatic arc. And so I think when you make a painting, you have to decide what to paint, how to frame it, where to begin the story, where to end the story. I think those things actually have a lot to do with one another, even though I'm it's not often that people ask me about my soap opera past.
Well, I think there's also kind of a philosophical question too, which is that necessarily a painting freezes a face in a moment.
Right.
So, I mean, Lily Bart or Marianne Dashwood or whoever, they go through a lot of things over the over the course of a novel. So in a way, one of the things you're going to have to do, what you're doing, is saying what sums it up. Is that what you're doing? You're sort of saying what expression, what look on this face. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a great question. So in a perfect world, you mentioned Madame Bovary, and she, I think, is a good example. So the painting I did of Madame Bovary is based on a section of the novel in which Flaubert describes the look on her face between when she takes poison and when she dies. This is crack for me, right? This is exactly what I'm after. It is her eyes roll back in her head, her lips get dry, her skin gets pale. And so in a perfect world, everything I enter into a prompt to help me sculpt a likeness would be that specific. It rarely is. But some of the slippage is also interesting. Sometimes the fact that I think AI is at its best when we embrace its errors. I think it makes it more human. It makes it less robotic and dogmatic and artificial. But I think that in a perfect case, as in the case of Madame Bovary, what's great about it is that it's physical. And the opposite of that, if you will allow me to just answer it the other way, is trying to paint a child. So I sometimes do portraits of children, and what's so hard and so challenging about children is that on the one hand, they're perfect, right? They have their faces are perfect geometry. On the other hand, they are the equivalent of the car going off the showroom floor. They change 5 seconds later. And that capturing the mercurial nature of a child's face is a marvelous challenge, because I think if you also spend enough time, as I tried to do, looking at children's faces, you realize that buried in that beautiful geometry is the person they're going to be. And if you can capture that, that's the goal.
I should say that as a point of amusement, I sent to Jessica earlier today a little collage of my 1976 Yale student ID and my 2022, something like that, Yale faculty ID. And you got a little bit more of that sense. I don't know if I was driving off the lot in 1976, but there is something very shocking about the 50-year gap there.
There is. And obviously, we live in the age of being able to doctor your own photograph at will. And I use that software too. I actually think I'm very highbrow, lowbrow. I sometimes say I learned as much about painting portraits by looking at Caravaggio as looking at makeup tutorials on YouTube. And I think you have to be. I mean, we live in the age of screens. We live in the age of photo doctoring, image doctoring, and I think to find some veracity in the image. And again, here's where I think paint is so great, right? Because unlike an ID picture, unlike when I wrote my book on the face, I spent so much time looking at passport photos and ID pictures and the containers with which our identities kind of migrate from thing to thing. And if you look at a painting, it does stop you in time, I think, in a slightly different way.
Have you ever done a self-portrait? Would you ever do a self-portrait?
I have done self-portraits. They're painful. But I do them. I often do portraits of people in my family, which much to their chagrin. I think my daughter was extremely happy when I moved on from painting her, and she was my muse for a long time. But I'm familiar with those faces. There's a kind of consistency to what we look like intergenerationally. But I'm also really interested in resurrecting. Maybe this comes back also to my theater background. I'm really interested in history. It's why I love to do research. It's why I love to paint things that look like they were painted a long time ago, and yet they're modern. I think this kind of balancing act between what is contemporary and what is historical is something that is in my DNA. I will say that the most frequently asked question in my last exhibition in New York was, "Is the artist still alive?" Which really depends on the day, but was sort of a funny thing because I think it's there's a trickery in that, but I also think that also stops you. You're not looking at some snapshot on, taken on the beach yesterday. It's what makes a painting timeless, what makes an image timeless, what makes a face timeless. And as I say, we all have them, we know them, but I think what I'm trying to do is maybe know them in a different way.
Okay, you did sort of yada something there a little while back, and so I'm going to roll back to it. I think you used the word painful about the idea of a self-portrait.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
I who put the pain in painting? It's painful, right? I mean, it is an extremely solitary practice. It is you alone in the studio making sense of something that you hope others will make sense of also. And whether the pain is in the making of the image or the pain is coming up with the idea for what the body of work is going to be. I think the one thing that the pandemic taught me, painfully again, no yada yada, I'm going for it here, is because I wrote a book during the pandemic that was a revisiting of Ralph Waldo Emerson's essays on self-reliance, trying to target them to an audience of young art students who were unmoored from their studios and their teachers and their sort of routines, and as I was. And I thought, I'm old now, I should actually give back some lesson. And what I realized was that the thing you try to do that keeps it from being truly painful, all the disappointment, all the struggle, is to find a way to be in dialogue with yourself. And that can mean anything. Anybody you can be in dialogue with yourself on the tennis court, right? But in the studio, because it is by nature an extremely solitary endeavor, I think you really need to understand how to make something make sense to someone else and be meaningful for someone else. Someone's going to want to spend money on a painting. They want to live with it in a way that I'm not living with it. Although my children do call them my imaginary friends when they come in the studio because I commune with them all day long. They think it's, yeah.
Yeah, that whole question of someone wanting to buy something, and I noticed that some of the characters, the fictional characters, have been bought. Are people ever? I mean, I find there's something unsettling about some of these paintings. I mean, in a really good way, unsettling. Do people have that reaction too, saying, "Oh, wow, I read Agnes Grey, but I never thought about her looking like that," or something like that?
You get everything, and to be a fly on the wall in your own exhibition is its own kind of pain. It's extremely revelatory. The things people say. Someone in my last show said, "Why do they all have the same nose?" And I said, maybe because they were all painted by the same person. I don't know. How do you answer that question, right? I mean, it's demoralizing if people think you're actually just repeating yourself. On the other hand, you want a certain consistent body of work to appeal to the public. I mean, I think about this a lot, actually. Am I aestheticizing faces? Am I dramatizing faces? Am I exoticizing faces in order to make them still? I mean, it's not for nothing. Paintings of attractive people sell better than paintings of unattractive people. And I've sold a lot of paintings, and the ones that are not as beautiful do not sell as well. So that's its own kind of pain.
No, that is its own kind of pain. Oh, well, Jessica Helfand, I could talk to you a lot longer, but I'm being told our segment is over. Artist and writer and author of Face, A Visual Odyssey. Thank you so much for your time and your candor today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to those of you who've been listening, thanks so much. We'll be back tomorrow with another show.
I've grown accustomed to your looks, accustomed to your voice, accustomed to